Hey gamers, welcome to another episode of the PTGC podcast. My name is Gerard and joining me is my co-host, Gio. Say hi.
What up?
If you like our content, make sure to like and subscribe to our channel for more episodes. We release this podcast every week, so make sure you come and join us. Our other co-host, Mike, is on vacation, so he won't be joining this week. But on today's episode, we'll be talking about the new Final Fantasy XIV expansion, a little bit of its drama, and a little bit more of its backstory. If you guys just don't know or not a long-time viewers or first time here, I do play Final Fantasy XIV as my main MMO. We are kind of an MMO channel at this point. We all play MMOs or really love MMOs, so it'd be good to talk about this Final Fantasy XIV, starting with the story and how people has received it, because if you haven't already known, it's kind of received like mixed reviews, basically. So some context before we start, because Gio, you have no idea anything about the story, correct?
No idea. Nope.
Yeah. Final Fantasy XIV has been going on for like a very long time. It's been more than 10 years. And the latest expansion is the first expansion where the story is not related to basically the beginning of the game. Because every expansion from the moment the game is launched until this one, has been about that story. So if you have not finished Final Fantasy XIV, if you have not, or if you're deciding to pick it up, please, this will be spoilers in this episode, so try to avoid this as possible and come back once you are done. With that being said, for those that remain, this episode is going to be about Dawntrail, the expansion that follows the Endwalker series and the Ascians series, and more importantly, the Wuk Lamat story. So, I would like to start with basically the criticisms. Gio, I believe you saw all the criticism. Do you remember all the criticisms about you've seen?
There's quite a bit, but briefly what I wrote note down was basically storytelling is an issue for the expansion. One of the things was that a lot of people have not praised the story by any means, which is kind of a big deal in the Final Fantasy world. As well as they felt it was kind of childlike. One of the things was lack of character development. So I guess they were saying Wuk Lamat, it doesn't have much depth. So that was one of the critiques. It was, like I said, very childlike. So those were the biggest ones I noticed. I mean, out of the reviews that I read from all different types of websites, I went to Metacritic, I went to Google, I went to Steam reviews, GameSpot even. All the fans, first off, I seen either very mixed or below average reviews for it from fans. And honestly, all of them were just complaining about the story. Like, I didn't hear any of them say anything about the gameplay. There was one note about like zones are a bit boring and kind of felt copy and paste. Like they didn't put much effort into creating diversity between each zone. So those were the things I picked up on, and I was like, oof. Like, I mean, from the critics' reviews, they gave, I would say, a B+, B average review on average by critics of the expansion. But as far as fans, not so much. So that's why I kind of wanted to get your in-depth perspective on it and see how you feel from being such a long-time player of the game.
Yeah. So I'd like to address some of the complaints. So let's start off with the first one you said, which is the Wuk Lamat not being a I don't want to say fleshed out character, but like a well-written character. So Wuk Lamat is a character that introduces us to the new city, the new domain, which is Zaktarao and Yaktarao. Basically the new island continent that we go to, and her people. Wuk Lamat is a child. We don't know the exact age, but it's insinuated that if she is to take the throne, she's at least 18, but not any older than like 25. So
Okay.
she's definitely a child or a young adult in that regard. So we're expecting an inexperienced and a immature character from the beginning. We knew this from the very get-go, before the even series started, because you meet her before or at the end of Endwalker, which is before the expansion. It was the last expansion, to introduce us to the character.
Okay.
For context, the entire expansion is about the kind of a trial to replace the current ruler of her mainland, of Tulial. And the main ruler is like, I'm growing old, I'm going to retire. One of my children should succeed me, but I am going to put this out to the open and make it a competition so that one of them, whoever wins the competition, will take my place as a ruler. Okay?
So they have to prove themselves worthy.
Yes, they have to prove themselves worthy. And this kind of is like the main plot point moving forward. It causes all the drama and the conflict, amongst other things. There are like extra tidbits, but it is the main force and plot line of the story. Now, Wuk Lamat has no accomplishments, so she goes out to seek help. Like, I don't want to say advisors, but people that would help her. Like, consider it like retainers or things like that. And that's what we, the main character, are going to be brought in for. This story is about Wuk Lamat. It is not about us. It is not about our faction. It is not about our posse. It is not about us. It is supposed to be focused around Wuk Lamat. And she does not go through many arcs, but she does grow more accustomed to the fact that she knows nothing. This is kind of like her arc that she resolves from the very beginning of the expansion to the end of expansion is basically showing she knows nothing, and now she is figuring out she knows nothing about her people, so she's like, I now know new things about the people I'm going to rule. I know their cultures, I understand them a little bit more, I get accustomed, and I realize that in order to get past my prideful self and accomplish things, I need to ask for help. That is her arc. She's not well written because she is supposed to be immature in the beginning, and she's supposed to end immature but a little bit wiser at the end. She's still a child. She still is, or I keep saying child. She's still young. She's still immature. She's not going to gain like insight and become immediately like not joking anymore, or like being more like serious and things like that. That's not how character develops. Character development is slow, and this entire expansion takes place in less than a week in game.
So in reality, I mean, it's unfair to expect that change in such a short amount of time, especially
Exactly.
she hasn't been, in a sense, tested as a leader. She doesn't know her people well enough to understand what comes with the role of being a ruler.
Yeah.
And that's what you guys are basically helping her with.
Yeah, and you're helping her establish herself and see what, and basically be a role model for her. And that's the position that the warrior light, aka the main character, aka us, is taking place in there. So is that like being short-sighted, or a what's the word I'm looking for? Kind of a like lazy writing? Maybe. But like, again, Dawntrail takes place in less than a week. It may be hours, maybe days, feels like for us, but it is less than a week in the actual game. You can't expect someone to develop an entire personality in a week. Now, does she fall flat on some people? Like, some people were not interested in her, or does she not provide certain things? That is perfectly fine. And that is kind of the downside of having a main character, or excuse me, like an NPC be the main character, is because if someone doesn't feel a connection towards them, it's going to feel bad, because that's the entire expansion.
Well, then let me ask you this. What would you say your average age of your player base is, though, playing Final Fantasy? Do you feel it's more between our ages, or late 20s, early 20s?
Yeah. I would say it is definitely not. I would say the main target audience is above 25 to 30, or at least above 25. Reason is that the context, or excuse me, the plot lines for the game are casual and like kid friendly. However, they do have dark connotations like war, death, murder, things like that. And the ideas and jokes tend to be on the more crass side. Not like vulgar, but like very, very crass. So
Yeah.
I would assume young adults to older middle age adults is the target audience. So like having that kind of age, like the middle adults, the people that are starting to get serious in their lives, take on like follow a young, immature, inexperienced, and kind of like jokingly person with Wuk Lamat makes sense. Like they would have a disconnect, so it's hard to say.
So that's why I asked what your normal average player base is, because like you were saying, like usually when you're doing the game and it's not around your character per se, and you're trying to connect the audience to an NPC and have them look at the character somewhat relatable, I could kind of see where players got turned off because, you know, like you said, most of you main players that probably been playing the game for 10 plus years are in your late 20s to early 30s. So, or mid 30s even, or maybe even older. It might be closer to my age. But it's kind of hard for us to relate to a character like that. And sometimes you want to see yourself in the character. So I can see the gripe there, especially, I know I mentioned earlier, but a lot of the people were excited about the previous expansion that had more of an adult-like setting and more of an adult, you know, premise.
Yes.
And storyline. So,
yes.
like, I could see where they felt like it regressed.
Yeah.
Their
and
approach.
What people don't seem to understand, or maybe tend to forget, is Endwalker is supposed to be a new storyline, and you can't start a storyline off with the dark parts of it first, because then you have no context. So, like, and this is where I'm going to say, no one remembers the fact that in Realm Reborn, which is is the base game, in Realm Reborn, the way they set up everything was just monsters called not Eidolons, excuse me, Primals are causing a lot of issues, and we need to stop them. And while that's going on, you need to stop the army that's invading us. That's the entire context. It isn't until the end of Realm Reborn where we actually start killing people and get into the darker content, which happens the exact same way in Dawntrail. Dawntrail, very beginning, very lighthearted, very, very just like up, like we have an idiot or an annoying a-hole with Zora Jaja at that time wasn't a a-hole, but Bakul Jaja was a very redeemable, like, asshole, like 100%. I hated that guy. There are some like problems with that character because he has that whole thing like, oh, I can be redeemed now, and we're like, no, you did some very bad things. You are unredeemable. You can be a good guy now, but you are unredeemable still. But you have those people, and that just translates the exact same way as Realm Reborn, and they're treating it like it should be Endwalker. And I'm just like, no, there is a disconnect. This can't be Endwalker. It has to be either Realm Reborn or the first expansion, which is Heavenward. It has to be one of those two. It can't be compared to Endwalker, because Endwalker is literally a climax. It is a finisher. It is supposed to be the pinnacle end fact of a storyline we've been following for many, many years. Okay, so there should be not a like continuation between the two, and you can't just say this needs to be an exact same as Endwalker. No. Best case scenario, you'll get the base game or the first expansion in like kind of tempo in that regards, because you need to start a story. How do you start a story? You got to start slow. You got to let people understand what the fuck is going on. Exposition is needed.
I completely agree. And just being a fan of Final Fantasy for so long, and we talked about this. I don't understand why. I think we talked. I can't remember why I said I never really got into the MMO aspect of it. But knowing Final Fantasy games, there is times where like sometimes I found it too kiddie-ish. Like for instance, 9 is one of your favorite ones. For me, I couldn't connect with the main character like that. That's why
Yeah.
9 is one of my least favorite ones. Not that it wasn't a great game, but I just couldn't connect with the characters like that. I saw it kind of childish and kiddyish. It was funny at times. It amused me, but it's not my favorite one by any means. So, like, I kind of get where players come from, and then especially when you have that average age group, I can kind of see where the gripe is. But I understand your point too. You gotta kind of build the storyline. Now, here's my question to you. Now, do you think Square Enix maybe speeds up the next expansion, doesn't wait a 2-3 year gap, and maybe try to do it a year, because players were kind of, like I said, like average reviews for anyone that I looked at, I didn't see anything higher than an average of 6 from fans at all. That's bad. Like, there's obviously some that, praise the game and stuff like that, but it's very far and few between. And it's not like even like there's a lot of like even middle ratings. It's more like either really, really
high
good
or
really, really, really bad. Yeah. Like, there's no in between, barely.
And it's always about the story in this regard, because the story was very, and I could see how people hated it and how people enjoyed it, because it is a takeoff from the like, I am the main character, the story revolves around me and what I do. In this case, it's about Wuk Lamat's storyline and her, so I'm not the main character. It's a real big turnoff for people who play a single player game or play for that like story. But like sometimes you just gotta deal with it. But like I don't think Square Enix is going to speed up the expansion, because there is a lot more content that is guaranteed to happen between the next expansion and this. We still we're like hitting end game content now. It has been, I think, the expansion came out July 2nd. So it has been several weeks. We still haven't left, at the time of this recording, it still haven't left July. And we're just about to get Savage, which is true one of the end game contents. So one of the hardest contents to do in the game. So people have been, literally the end game raiders have been working to this point. We've been finding this point, and then we just got Extremes, which is the mount farms that people will do. So you have mount farming that's being done right now, Savage that's coming out. Then we have our alliance raids that are going to be for, I don't want to say the casuals, but like people who are not looking to end game farm, they're looking forward to alliance raids, which is
everybody's doing the grind fest basically.
Yes.
In between the end game content.
Yes.
I understand that.
And there's going to be 12 tiers of Savage Raid. We only get 4 at a time. So it's going to be 4 Alliance Raid, 4 Savage Raids, another 4 Alliance Raids, another 4 Savage Raids, and another 4 Alliances. Those all have to come out before the next expansion. And those are usually, they're spread out between months, usually. So, so it's going to be at least 2 years before we get a next expansion. Now it has been like Endwalker released December 30, or excuse me, it happened in December. I think it was December 31st. Yes, December 31st, 2021. So about like 3 years, because Dawntrail released in July 2nd. But that gap probably is the very foundation of what they do. So every 2 years they release an expansion, because they have to. They're. I don't want to say we're promised, but we are definitely looking forward to those end game contents and things like that. So they don't release anything early. They're not going to retcon anything, because this is setting up the next expansion, which is still going to connect to this, because this is a new storyline. And they are already introduced characters that have not paid off yet. So people are judging the story even though it's not complete. And so, I was going to say, honestly, they have done worse storylines.
Well, yeah, that's what I was going to ask. But before that, I was going to say, is there something you guys are looking forward to end game wise that has been talked about or rumored about, that you guys obviously might not be in this part, but in the next year or so that's supposed to come into endgame content? Any specific raids or dungeons or villains that you guys are waiting to be introduced to the story? Is there something like that? Because like my comparison for like WoW and stuff like that, we, you know, how they broke it up like you guys do, where there's different raids that come out at different times. Like we would look for certain dungeons, so to speak, and raids.
Yeah, so the way the endgame content works in Final Fantasy 14 is mostly like we'll get kind of, I don't want to say watered down versions, but we'll get a version of a raid or fight for like a boss, and it itself would be a new storyline or a side storyline. So the content in Dawntrail is for raids. We're having a tournament going on right now that's in the last zone. In the last zone, there's an arena that's going on. Like, oh, you have to fight through these people and work your way up a ladder to become the champion for the lightweight, light heavyweight, and light cruiserweight, and heavyweight. It's just weird names. I'm just saying things random, but those are the things, the championships, they do that. But it's a side story pertaining to either new NPCs or things like that. In the case of the arena, there is a new NPC that we meet and we get to learn their backstory and things like that. But we'll get the story first with kind of watered down, aka like basic versions of the bosses, and there are released 4 bosses. So the story will take us through 4 bosses. Then like a week or 2 later, in this case is 2 weeks, we'll get savage versions, which is the endgame content, that are just super difficult version of those 4 bosses. Like the boss is the same, but the mechanics might be radically different. So those are what we're looking forward to, and we don't know what they are until they release the watered down story or the watered down bosses.
Well, then let me ask you, so far, have you seen anything like sometimes, like even when we had the new releases, because I can only really talk about WoW per se when it comes to this, though I haven't played that forever. Have the new raids had anything exciting, any new dynamics that were exciting, any new challenges that you guys have come across that you was like, oh, they haven't done this before, or this is pretty unique because maybe they mix 2 kind of bosses, like strategies, you know what I mean? Has anything been challenging or different, you would feel like?
Challenging for the bosses? Sort of, not really. Like they have added, they recently, and this is also just more apparent with more just bosses, they have been adding a mechanic that's been kind of being like, I don't want to say overplayed, but being redone and rehashed. So there was a boss in Endwalker. It was one of the endgame raids called Barbarisha, and one of her mechanics, she would knock the players away from her, and she would start up a storm, and you have to get in the correct position while going past tornadoes and knockups that spawned randomly. Okay. And it is a nightmare to do because everything is random. There's no pattern in it. But it's something, it was like, I don't want to say it's the first time it happened, but it was the most proliferate, like the most recent time. And since then, this expansion, they've added that mechanic 3 times.
So that kind of brings me back to that copy and paste thing that I read. Like they kind of feel like some of it has kind of been like that's why I'm curious. All right. So like, all right, if they're not happy with the story, right? The players, is there something else in this expansion that's being done to kind of keep the players playing, keep them interested in the expansion itself? And if not, what do you think Square Enix should do about that? Because from what I see, they feel like this expansion was kind of lazily done.
Yeah, so the copy and paste thing is a good thing, because I mentioned it when I was going through the areas, that the areas are feeling really like a mix. Like certain areas feel like, oh, they just copied the same layout as this one area, which I think Zoctoral looks a lot like not Garabania, Isabard, which is the one of the last areas for Endwalker. and Yaktara looks a lot like Stormblood because there are two, like the area is split into two by a huge like canyon and things like that. I was like, this is just basically a rehashing of Gurabania. So I was just like, these are big maps that look exactly the same as other maps, just the trees are different, the enemies are different, the culture is different, but it's basically the exact same. But is that lazy? Kind of. Not really, because like, how many ways can you make a map?
I agree. But is
like,
there any interactions with the map that's maybe different from other expansions in any way?
No, but that's always the same. Like, the way the map works in Final Fantasy XIV is when you first get into a map, you can't fly. You can't fly. You have to walk around, things like that. You can use your mount, but like your mount's going to be on the ground. In order to unlock flying in the area, you have to go to key points where there are things called Aether Currents. You unlock the Aether Currents, and once you get all of them through either side quests, main scenario, and finding them in the area, you unlock flying. Okay, case in point, it makes it like you have to walk around the area at most to see everything first. Once you unlock flying, you are never ever on the ground afterwards. There's no point of being on the ground. So my idea is, why would you put so much effort to make something different and unique if no one's going to see it after they unlock flying?
Well, maybe they could do something with interacting in the air even.
That would be good, but besides the graphics update, they have not changed that engine in over 10 years. The game engine for Final Fantasy is very, very old. They have been spending years just to make the graphics better. So that's just visuals, not even like actual changes to the mechanics of the world.
Well, then let me ask you this. So, like, because we talked about this when it came to WoW. When do you think Square Enix should kind of put a last expansion, cap it, and start doing a new Final Fantasy Online? Because, like you said, you start running into this issue where it's an old engine, it's an old system. You can only do so much with it at this point. So, when do they start? Because that's the only thing I've noticed with MMOs, where it kind of gets, you can only start doing so much with it. They haven't been running as long, but
yeah. But here's my thought on it, though. I don't know how it's coded, but if they have the ability to update the graphics, they might also have the ability to update the mechanics and just switch out the engine and keep it in game. It might be a heavier load, but if they can do it in piecemeal, if they do graphics and then they do like software like enhancements and then performance, if they can do it in like sections like that, they may be able to redo the engine completely. So I don't know. Like if before the graphics update, if you would have asked me, I would have said maybe they do another trilogy for expansion and then make Final Fantasy 18. Because Final Fantasy 17 is probably going to be a single player game. Final Fantasy 18 would most likely be the new MMO. But with the graphics engine update, I do believe there's a chance that they may be able to do the engine upgrade just in smaller iterations. Just like the next expansion will update fluidity and performance. The next update will do updates on character movement and things like that. The next update would be an inventory reimagining or redo. So they can keep like doing the small things, updating the engine. And all like eventually they'll increase or they'll replace the entire engine and it will no longer be the old one. But we'll have to see, because like as I mentioned earlier, or I don't know if I did, the graphics engine update for this new expansion only looks different if you have the settings on. Because if you don't have if it's not high quality, it's going to look exactly the same to you. The only difference that people actually saw was the change to mount physics, because they changed the way the mounts work in the game. Before, if you were trying to go diagonal, so if you were WASD or like a keyboard player, you play WA. before it would just hard turn and just go diagonal. Now your mount actually turns and kind of yaws into that direction, so it does not break immersion as much. So we'll see what other changes they make and what they can do for the engine.
Okay. Well, I'm just curious because, like, that's one of the things, especially with MMOs being the older ones. I just get curious because we've talked about it before. Now, obviously, Final Fantasy is a newer one, so maybe they kind of set themselves up knowing, hey, listen, we might have to update these things later on if we want to keep this game going. So that's why I was curious. And to get back to the expansion of Dawntrail, I'm just curious what they have in mind, or if there's any, like I said, I asked you before, is there anything you guys heard that you guys are still looking forward to in the expansion that would help players stay engaged in the expansion, even if they're not so attached to the main character and the story itself?
Yeah. And the only thing is the rehashing. Like, if you're an old Final Fantasy 14 player, you already know what's coming. So, I mean, we'll get more updates to the story. This current story, we'll get like 3 or 4 more quests that kind of leads up into the next expansion. Every like major patch. So we'll see how they work onto it. There's a lot of loose ends still going on, and there are definitely going to be some talks about the future for Final Fantasy 14, because I'm pretty sure they're not going to make this as long as the last one, because the last story arc took 5 expansions. There's no way they leave it that long. So
I don't think so.
Yeah. So we'll see what they do. Do you have any questions about Final Fantasy 14 otherwise? Like about the gameplay or anything like that?
Not so much. I was just gonna ask you, how much of a difference with that graphics? Like, so give me a comparison. Is it like going from, like, say, Final Fantasy 7 to Final Fantasy 10 increase, or like 9 to 10 kind of deal? Like, not a huge.
So it'd be the equivalent, and I would like to say first, the graphics update isn't changing polygons mostly. It's just changing resolution. So this is the equivalent of going from Final Fantasy 7 to Final Fantasy 8.
Okay.
Where it's like, oh, it looks like the cinematics and like shadows look good, but like they're still like fucking, I can see polygons.
Yeah, okay. I got you.
Maybe Final Fantasy 7 to Final Fantasy 9. How about that? That would be the biggest difference.
Okay.
But yeah, so I think that's pretty much it talking about Final Fantasy 14.
One more thing. What would you review it? What would you rate the expansion? In your personal opinion, where would you rank it in the expansions?
Out of 10? Or out of all the expansions?
Just rank it in the expansions.
First would be Shadowbringer. Second would be Endwalker. Third, I would put Dawntrail. Fourth, so it would be third. Fourth would be Heaven's Ward. Fifth would be Stormblood, and then sixth would be Realm Reborn, which is base game.
I heard base game was terrible.
Base game was a
the first expansions would saved it basically.
100%. The ending of Realm Reborn and the beginning of Heaven's Ward really hooked me. Like, I got hooked because of Heaven's Ward, honestly. And I hate when people say you need to wait a while before it gets good, but for Final Fantasy 14, you do really need to go through the bad sludge and shit to get
maybe that's why I didn't get into it.
Yeah, like it is the one time where I say, like, I always bring this up about content, and this is the final thing I'm going to say. It's my final comment. I always bring this up about content and anything in any media. If I don't like it in the first 10 minutes, even if it gets good 30 minutes later, I'm not going to get into it. Because that's bad design. But at this point in time, if you can't go back to change the beginning content, but it does get good and stay good afterwards, then I would say you need to suffer just a little bit. Suffer just for a little bit and then enjoy the rest of it, because it does get good at Heaven's Ward, and it stays at least optimally good the entire time. And then You get the best climax in Shadowbringers and Endwalker if you pay attention to the story. It feels amazing. That best video game writing, in my opinion, for the last 10 years. The last 5 years.
Mm.
All right, that is it for us. Make sure you leave a comment down below on your thoughts on Final Fantasy XIV's new expansion, or if you don't play Final Fantasy XIV, your thoughts if you would ever play Final Fantasy XIV, or what you've heard. Thank you guys for watching. We'll see you next time. Peace.
Later.
Thank you for watching this episode of the Part-Time Gamers podcast. Be sure to like the video and subscribe to our channel for more content like this. And follow us on our other social platforms on TikTok, Instagram, and Discord. Links for those will be provided in the description. Thank you again. We will see you on the next episode of the podcast. And make sure you make some time for video games. Peace.